The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Solar Podcast, developing commercial and community solar. My guest today is the founder and CEO of UGE International. Welcome to the show, Nick Blitterswyk.
Thanks so much, Tim. Great to be here.
Really appreciate you coming on the show. Looking forward to telling your story to a broader audience. And, honestly, I think community solar is all the rage, and for a lot of reasons, right? It's kind of a bite-sized chunk, but it's substantive, right? We're fueling hundreds of homes with a community solar project, whether that's a 2 megawatt or a 3 megawatt or a 5 megawatt. The market varies geographically slightly. And it's accessible to many developers. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of what UGE does, tell us a little bit about your background, Nick, and how you got interested in the energy industry.
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to agree with you, and we'll come back to community solar, but we're really excited about that. But, brief background on myself. So I started UGE about 12 or 13 years ago now. I'm Canadian. I started my working career in New York City, and so been in the metro New York area ever since then. What attracted me to it, was really a combination of an environmental drive, and then the whole technology side of things was very much of interest for me in those sort of inconvenient truth years, as I think of them, about 15 years ago or so now. So, I say like a passion turned to a hobby, turned to a company over a couple of years through like 2007 to 2009. But yeah, it started as a bit of a side project from my day job, which was, I was an actuary. So totally different industry. But, the initial idea was like a solutions-based approach for the built environment. And we went down all sorts of rabbit holes, in getting to where we are today. But that's how it all started.
And in the pre-show, we were talking that you've dabbled in quite a variety of aspects of the energy industry, including small wind. So how did that go, working in small wind?
Yeah, so when we were first starting it up, as I mentioned, the built environment, CNI is where my interest lay when I first started the company. If you think back to circa 2008-9 type timeframe, on the one hand, solar was $10 a watt installed, small scale wind was $10 a watt installed. At that point in time, the future as we see it today wasn't anywhere near as clear, and so it was a solutions-based approach. We were looking at wind, solar, and just providing these providing integrated solutions to building owners and the like. As we went down that path, though, we started playing with a few wind turbines, and they kept breaking. And so the thought process we had was to develop our own technology, and we went down that path for a number of years. Building integrated, we went down the vertical axis path. I have lots to say on that now, having run that company for 7 years or so until we divested it in 2016. A hard business to make much money on, but at one point in time, we were the world's leading vertical axis wind turbine manufacturer first half of last decade, and did a lot of cool projects for the stadium that the Philadelphia Eagles play in. Actually put a couple in the Eiffel Tower. So it was exciting, but a bit hard to scale.
Yeah, I think the Eiffel Tower is probably the most famous building integrated wind turbine project on the earth. I didn't know you were connected to that, so that's cool.
Yeah.
And we've dabbled in small wind, installed some rooftop vertical axis turbines. But really my understanding is the technology struggles to pencil, so to speak, and really go head to head or go toe to toe with rooftop solar, or ground mount solar for that matter. Certainly at utility scale, wind is killing it and will continue to do so. And we see wind and solar now really going head to head on a grand scale, but building integrated is a tough sell. But there are people still pursuing that technology. I'm connected to a group at Argonne that is developing a next generation small wind vertical axis turbine, and they're not giving up. So there are people out there who think it has legs.
Yeah, I'll just say that when we divested that business now 5.5 years ago, we we had a roadmap that was only, like 24-month roadmap to what we thought was to decrease the cost per kilowatt hour by about 50%. Like there still is a lot of improvements that you can make in that industry. Even at 50% though, distributed solar is still a lot cheaper in the vast majority of use cases. So, wish them well, but we're happy to be where we are today.
And I can only guess, but did Bernie Sanders have something to do with the name of your company? Because it is huge, as Bernie would say. But no, tell us the story of how you got the name UGE.
Well, actually, going back to the whole built environment and the initial idea behind the business, it was urban green energy when we first started out.
Makes sense.
As we were talking about in the preamble there, Tim, we've also worked a lot internationally, and so actually when we started doing more international work, for language purposes and everything else, we just went with the three letters, and so that's been UGE for several years now.
Yeah, I would love to go to a three-letter name myself, except my three letters happen to overlap with the Consumer Electronics Show, uh, which is unfortunate. But well, let's dive into your growth trajectory, and you know what where did you first really get traction geographically, and how has that changed over the now 12, 13 years that you've been in business?
Yeah, so in and around the New York market, we've always done a lot of business over the years. So in recent years, obviously states like New Jersey, being just across the Hudson, are part of that home turf for us. In recent years, especially on the community solar side, we were pretty early on in Maine. The project in my background here is a project we developed and built there. Um, and really kind of along the eastern seaboard, at least mid-Atlantic and Northeast is where we're strongest these days in terms of developing commercial and community solar projects. We in our company's past, we've done a lot in Canada, especially in Ontario. Tim, as you know, we at the same time that we divested our wind business, we acquired a solar EPC, which today is the technical chops of us engineering and building out our own projects. But at that time, we ran it as an EPC business unit for a few years as well. So we have a lot of history in Canada, which make up a good portion of the 500 megawatts or so of experience that we have. And then our third market these days is the Philippines. So, we did a lot of international work earlier on. We mentioned, of course, the Eiffel Tower and so on. The Philippines, as we focused our energy just on commercial and community solar development, Philippines was the one real international market that we held on to. So we have a really good team over there developing rooftop commercial solar for the most part. Interesting market over there as well.
Yeah, I'm very interested in international. We've done just a little bit. We did a project in Haiti at the U.S. Embassy, a big carport, and it's uh, it's high risk, high reward, I like to say, and but um, but there's room for many markets, right? The ultimately solar is a global industry, and we just happen to be sitting on one of the major global gold mines, so to speak, here in the United States and Canada, and it's full steam ahead now. Um, what what inspired you to get into community solar, though? Because that was something that has taken a while to incubate and to mature, and now it is really finding its legs. And I guess I'm curious, when you say you got into Maine, is that the current wave of activity going on in Maine, or were you in Maine before there was like a wave of activity?
It in essence is part of the wave that we're seeing right now. So we quote unquote got into Maine. I would say 2019. I think Tyler Adkins on our team, he he moved there in 2018 if I'm not mistaken. So we happened to be right place, right time. And so Tyler is part of the executive team at UGE, been with the company for about 8 years, and he's a Mainer. And so he was quite interested in on the the grassroots side of things, what was happening in Maine, and some of the maybe early stage aspects of the development of that market in 2018, and that led to us being pretty early in terms of locking up a number of sites, and had our first community solar project turn on. Must have been last fall to winter, which was pretty early in the community solar side of things, and have a number of those types of projects that we're still in the stages of developing and building out. So yeah, definitely this wave.
It is a, community solar is a market where there's many advantages to first movers. And of course, that's a high risk, high reward scenario, right? If you stay out of the game, then you might miss a real opportunity. But if you get in the game, you might be waiting for years and years for the market to pop, so to speak, right? Because the stars do need to align. You need legislation, especially right, specific for community solar. And even then, after you get legislation, it takes a while for things to really come to fruition. But if you're not in there early before that, then you really have no chance,
Yeah.
at least in the first tranche or tranches, because there's hundreds of sites that are under development in these early markets, like Pennsylvania right now. And I don't know if you can speak to all the markets that you're, working in, but when you think about large commercial and community solar, Nick, what is it that sets UGE apart when you're, talking to financiers and other partners? How are you different than the rest of the field out there?
Yeah, as you and I know from working in the sector day in, day out, a lot of companies working in this overall sector, but each playing their own roles and having their own pieces or own strategies. So I think the first thing is that 500 megawatts plus of experience now really sets us apart from a lot of the companies that we see out there. And then, as we grew the company, originally it was a solutions-based approach, which a bit different than a developer, but sort of more on the development side of things. We acquired the EPC business about 5.5 years ago. And then about 18 months ago, we stopped selling projects and instead started financing those projects to own and operate on our balance sheet instead. And so in this sector, playing all three legs of the stool and being able to move those projects completely through the whole life cycle, we see that as setting us apart from a lot of companies in terms of the levels of efficiency that we have, and so on. And like I think earlier when we first brought up community solar, and actually you mentioned, I think, the hundreds of individuals or families that'll subscribe to these systems and that being a benefit. I also look on we do ground mount community solar too, but especially on the rooftop side of things, all the REITs and so on that owned all these buildings with rooftops but weren't the energy user. And I feel like that's one of the aspects that held commercial solar from scaling as quickly as it could over the last decade. And I feel community solar really unlocks that aspect of this sector too. And so, we're excited for it for a number of reasons. And that was how we first got into community solar in New York City, by the way, is, we had been doing PPAs here, like rooftop PPAs, but so many of the companies we spoke with were just so much more interested in collecting a lease for their empty rooftop as opposed to a traditional PPA. And so we really see it unlocking growth in this mid-scale sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree that a lot of rooftop owners, we see this in Illinois now, that there's going to be big tranches of rooftop community solar. It wasn't necessarily the first go-to in our first wave, but it is a go-to now in the second wave. And heck, if you can make some rent from your roof, why not?
Mhm.
It's a both and. Of course, we'd love to sell them a rooftop array that they're going to own and will offset their load as well. But there's room for a variety of types of ownership. Um, when you think about, you know, how dynamic the US market is, I'm not sure about Canada. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that. But what is it that, uh, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there is this risk and reward phenomenon. You can't expect to hit a home run every time, but what is your approach to a market or markets, as we discussed, you don't go after just everything under the sun. You are quite selective about where you're choosing to develop projects. How do you decide what markets to go after?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good point. And like in Illinois, right? We're not in Illinois, and why not? Like there's a question about really wanting to understand the markets that we're in and really being specialists in those markets, and then the trade-off with the the level of resources and so on that you need to be able to successfully be a leader in that market. And so for us, markets like New York and New Jersey and Maine, and you mentioned Pennsylvania earlier, which is a state that we're developing some of the earlier community solar projects there right now, Maryland, et cetera. So as the company's scaling, we're getting into additional states, but it's something where it's something where, like, I think to manage that risk reward, you really need to understand those markets well. Um, you know, may, Maybe other companies would splash a lot of money around and hope that a certain percentage of projects stick. Um, Maybe it is that EPC background to us about really wanting to make our work pay off. And so in that sense, I think we're pretty selective in terms of where we're developing projects, and making sure that the vast majority of them become real projects.
Very good. What can you say about um, your initiative to scale the company? It is interesting, and it must be tempting, I have to say, for an entrepreneur like yourself who's been in the game since day one. For all intents and purposes, you were an early adopter, and now are a veteran of the solar industry. And the buyers must come knocking. How do you fend them off, so to speak, and stick to your guns in terms of organic growth, and how does that play out for you in the long term?
Yeah, lots of thoughts that come to mind here. So, number one is, having run the company for the last dozen years or so, we definitely made a lot of mistakes early on, trying to be, all things to all people, and getting out, over our skis, if you will. And so those are lessons that really feel we've been putting to good use here the last 5 years or so, as we look to scale the company up and scale it the right way and scale it for a long and successful future. You asked earlier about how we stand out, and I think that actually, when I think about some of the larger names in our space, and without naming names, like even when we're recruiting and bringing people over to UGE, the aspect that we are pure play in this commercial and community solar market, that we don't have a parent company that is maybe changing our culture or dictating the way that we do things, that's maybe outside of the culture that we built over the years. Those have been really seen as big pluses. And then lastly is, we are a public company, which is another aspect to our background. We with my Canadian roots, we went public in Canada probably a bit too early, back in 2014, but we've kind of grown into that platform over time. And that's given us a nice, a nice, what would you call it, like an asset, if you will. It's part of our pedigree of being able to leverage that for scale. And so, I think we've been having a good couple of years here, and I think there's a lot of tailwinds, not just for us, but for the sector, to see this sector really grow nicely this decade.
I'm always curious, and if you can speak to this, please do. If you can't, no worries. But with a public company, when people buy your stock, how does that benefit the company directly? Of course, the stock price benefits those investors over time if it goes up. But how does that play out for the your ability to do what you do in the world?
It's a good question. I think there's a couple aspects to that, and it's funny, right? I mean, there's some people out there that would say that the market's efficient and so on, but in reality, I like the saying that the market's always right but never on time. And so the question about, when someone's out there buying shares in in the open market, how does that benefit the company? The short answer is that it doesn't in the immediate future, right? You'd be buying shares off of somebody else, and that's irrelevant to UGE. But at the same time, like as the share price appreciates, as more people are buying, they're saying, "Hey, UGE is doing a great job. I want to own some of those shares." The two ways it ends up benefiting us. Number one is that we have an employee option plan, right? And so virtually all of our employees have options in the company, and then also in the past when we've raised equity, there's often warrants out there. So in essence, options held by institutional investors and the like. And so what happens is as the share price appreciates, options and warrants are exercised, and that is cash that comes directly to UGE. And then the other aspect, and like you saw this with UGE and also with the solar sector at large. You look at charts of solar companies through Q4 and Q1 of this year. The sector caught a lot of attention in the public markets. It was, we all in the industry knew how much the industry had been growing the last several years, but the public markets sort of slept on it. And so with a lot of new capital coming into the public markets, that meant that, let's say that there was a fund that wants to buy, just throwing out numbers, a $5 million position. When the public markets, it would be very hard to do that. So maybe they buy a $1 million position, but then through our investment bankers or what have you, they say, hey, we'd really like to invest more in this company. And so then you do a secondary offering. And so, UGE, we were fortunate enough to bring in some great investors back in late January, early February to a secondary offering and gave us some of the additional capital for us to scale here in the years to come as well.
Very cool. And I was thinking back to our pre-show call. You have done a partnership with Bloomberg. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so it was with Bloomberg, and the other company that definitely deserves a shout out in that is Common Energy, a community solar aggregator subscription management company. And so that right there, very cool. Bloomberg, of course, community solar, you're looking to sell that energy offtake to. It could be corporates, it could be residential off-takers, and that depends on the market. But what Bloomberg's doing is really promoting subscription of community solar projects to their employees. And so, as we know with community solar, in most cases, you're purchasing energy cheaper than you get from the grid. And so Bloomberg saw that and said, hey, we'd love for our employees to take part in this as well. And so, so to start out with, it's 2 projects on Staten Island that we're just starting construction on right now. And I know that many Bloomberg employees signed up to be energy off-takers just in the first day after that announcement. And so cool that they're getting involved in that. And I think with community solar and other types of projects too, definitely we're seeing a big uptake this year in corporate interest, whether that be the offtake or other aspects of this as well, which is great to see.
So let's talk a little more about community solar, how it works, who it benefits. And you've mentioned a couple of the markets: New York, Maine, Pennsylvania. You are not working in Massachusetts, which is quite interesting and true to your tradition of really working where you understand and want to focus. What Yeah, I guess if I'm an investor and I'm sitting on some millions of dollars, thinking about investing that in a portfolio of community solar projects, it's it's quite dizzying, the opportunities that one has, both in terms of the number of companies that are developing projects, the number of markets. Every market has nuances. It has ebbs and flows and booms and busts. How do you guide investors and partners, I guess, and help them see through this noise?
Yeah, I think that on the flip side, we talked about the 500 megawatts of experience and so on, right? So there's certain aspects of our resume which helps get people interested to start with. I think on the other aspect is that a couple things. Number one is there is benefits to the diversified aspect of things, right? Let's say it's a portfolio across New York, New Jersey, and Maine, as an example. There's benefits to, instead of investing in a 20 megawatt single site in New York State, to have that split up across multiple states and jurisdictions, and so I think that that's been good, especially for institutional investors coming in to invest in the projects in this sector. I'd be remiss not to say that community solar, commercial solar, you are generally getting a bit better returns, right, than utility scale side. So it is a benefit to doing so. So I think if you're one of those investors looking for the long-term yield that these portfolios, these projects can offer, if you're working with a good company that's been around for a long time, it's an attractive place to see, to be. And I should say too that we see that with the level of interest from institutional investors in being project owners in particular, or investors in project in this space. And you and I both, I'm sure, have seen various articles out recently from various commercial and community solar developers raising nine-figure sums of money to build out projects in this space.
Very good. I guess another question that is almost constantly on my mind, Nick, given the rocket ship ride that we are on in the clean energy transition industries, wind, solar, battery storage, and others, but those three are the real rocket ship right now for the next 3 decades. What are you looking for in talent, and what do you say to aspiring college grads or early stage, early career professionals about the energy industry?
Well, I think there is so much opportunity and so much going on. And, in this decade, I mentioned Tyler Adkins' name earlier, and he likes to say, one of the executives on our team, he likes to say that if you actually look at the time scale of this sector, so much was done in the last decade, and I don't want to belittle it, but it set things up that this decade is really where we see the actual deployments in renewable energy, um, getting to a very, very large material state, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Like if you go forward to 2100 and you ask what decade did renewable energy become the dominant source of energy for not just the US but the world, we feel very strongly it's this decade. And I know like IEA has a projection that 80% of all the new energy being built by 2030 will be solar around the world. The last 2 years in the US, it's just been a little bit under half in the US. And so, number one, it's just to cement that like this is a really exciting time to be in this industry. And if you back up, some things are obvious. Some things are if I'm an engineer, then there's opportunities for electrical engineers, for environmental engineers, for mechanical engineers, for civil engineers. There's a ton of things happening there. I think and on the financing of projects and so on as well. I think one of the areas that if I was in university or college right now, I might not appreciate as much as I do working within the industry is on the development side of things. It's very cross-disciplinary, right? When you're out there originating and developing projects, bringing it from an initial introduction to a client or landowner or building owner to the point where that project is ready to construct. Those developer roles are some of the highest paying, frankly, in the industry. It's bringing together a lot of different pieces, and it's really where I feel like the best and brightest. If you're exiting school right now, that's where I would be. That's where I would be looking for a role.
Yeah, no matter what your interest is, whether it's sales or finance or marketing or engineering or the trades, we need mechanical installers, we need electrical, we need electricians, we need laborers. So many different disciplines are utilized, the full spectrum.
Yeah.
And so literally anybody under the sun could find a toehold in the clean energy space
Yeah.
without a doubt. You have to take action. You have to network, get involved in your state organization, and it's not going to necessarily fall in your lap, but it won't be hard if you're assertive and passionate and stick to it. So
Yeah.
I encourage any listener who's interested in energy to check out wind, solar, and battery storage. It's just an amazing, once in a lifetime opportunity, really.
Yeah. Well, and Tim, if I can just touch on that there is, I think you and I both were sort of part of the old guard of this industry at this time, right? At like the roughly speaking, the decade plus type mark. Um, and, and I think that again, a decade from now, it's going to be the same type of thing where people will have grown so much in their careers. And so there is so much opportunity. I know that the recording date for this podcast is not the same as the airing date, but I know that, today we tweeted out some job openings that we have, and I know a lot of other companies are out there hiring as well. So yeah, so I think, and actually one other thing is that I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that, this sector, has, I think if you compare the number of jobs in solar or number of jobs in renewable energy, and you compare it to things like, natural gas and oil and gas and other types of those traditional fossil fuels, my understanding is solar is actually a fair way ahead of those traditional sources of energy at this point in time, and obviously only growing from here.
Yeah, and there's the added benefit of being part of the solution, right?
Yeah.
Everybody understands. I think 65% of Americans now consider climate change to be a crisis. And the way out of that crisis is the energy transition and electrification of everything. It's not rocket science. We have the technology. It is strictly a matter of, can we deploy the technology fast enough in meaningful enough scale to stop the crisis from getting even worse. And it is pretty much guaranteed to get worse before it gets better. But we haven't crossed the ultimate tipping point where there's just no hope. Hope is not lost, but it's through action that we can maintain that glimmer of hope. And of course, lean in and accelerate the way we need to. We really need to accelerate. So I will put your website on screen here. It is ugei.com/careers. Check out UGE's website. Every solar developer in the United States who has 5+ years of experience is now hiring, period, right? They're all hiring. And same for the EPCs, the installers, the engineering firms, just across the board. So there is just so much opportunity out there. Nick, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what are some success stories that you're particularly proud of, besides the things, your history, so to speak, and your legacy? What stands out when you look at the near-term future or the recent past?
Um, it's as we were looking at that career page, I have to say, like, the people that we work with, and I think that, this is true within the company, and this is true within the industry as well. And like, for example, this conversation, right? It's like there's so many people that want to be part of the solution in this space, and so that's what I'm proud to be a part of. I'd be remiss not to say that on that page you were on, at the bottom was spontaneous application, and so I invite anybody who's interested, even if they don't see a role for themselves, to submit. And some of the folks at the company that have been with us the longest came through, almost hired themselves by saying, "Hey, this is a company I want to be at," and so on. But I think that every megawatt that we deploy, every kilowatt hour that we generate is something to be proud of. Like you were saying, it's uh, actually, and one data point to show that, like, hey, the solution really is here. If you look at Maine, and I want to link this to something you said earlier about local regulations. There's states like New York where the cap for community solar versus where we are now, there's years of runway. There's other states like Maryland that have an annual cap that it hasn't been hit. And there's a market like Maine, which opened up without a cap, and a lot. There was a whole flood. You called it a wave earlier, right? We were fortunate to be there early. So we have a number of good projects with good queue position and so on that we'll be building out the next couple of years. But the point I'm getting to is that rush into Maine, if you look at the total the total number of projects that want to be developed in Maine, it would fully offset the energy used in Maine. in essence, if there's the political will, the people within this industry, all the pieces coming together, solar now makes economic sense in the vast majority of states within the U.S. as one example, and it's really just a matter of coming together and getting it done. And I really think that this decade, we're going to be well ahead of many people's projections in terms of just how much solar will actually be built out.
Well, what else would you like listeners to know about UGE and the industry? We have just a few minutes left, but I welcome you taking this conversation in any direction you like.
Well, I'll just say that we are a very collaborative bunch, and certainly myself as well. So a lot of people are finding their own way. I sometimes think of it as different companies solving their own Rubik's cube, even. And so certainly offer to anybody to reach out on LinkedIn or what have you, and look forward to collaborating with many of your listeners and viewers here. I think aside from that, we talked about the high level details of community solar. I think that the majority of states in the country will have community solar in the next few years. It's trending in that direction here pretty quick, and so that allows so many more building owners and landowners and energy users to get involved. That, like, my house, for example. Just there's a lot of trees around it. And so solar is just not a practical solution to use to generate as much energy as we'd like for this house. I'm
Yep.
thankful that community solar exists. So yeah, and I also say, like, on the public vehicle side of things, we went public. You can call it before it was cool. And in the last 12 months, we've seen the wave of companies going public. There's a lot that we've learned over that time frame about what it takes to be a good public company. What not to do as a public company, and finding the right path. And so it's another area that I certainly welcome further dialogue on. I would say that sitting here today, it's mostly been a positive experience, but there's certainly been days where we were more or less left for dead in the public markets as well. So it can go both ways.
Well, you must know what you're doing to have survived for 12 years. So many companies have fallen by the wayside during that time, and many more will be born moving forward. It's a very dynamic industry, like any economic opportunity where there is a lot of money to be made. It is pretty much a dog pile right now, and it's good, bad, and ugly. And we want more. We want more good. We want more professionals who are mission driven and are relationship oriented. Sometimes my gripe as an EPC is that developers want a race to the bottom. They want the cheapest solution for their project, and I understand that this is a profit driven industry. But it's not just about making money. It's also about having a high quality project that's going to return handsomely on that investment. So I caution those of you out there who are focused a little too much on the race to the bottom, so to speak.
Tim, if
I
I
guess,
can, oh, sorry, if I can touch on that briefly, I was just going to say that I do think that goes back to, being a full life cycle company. Number one is, right when we're developing it, we're thinking about how that project's going to be operating several years down the line, and making sure that things are done right for that reason. And then number two is, like you mentioned, relationships. And so many of our, on the rooftop side of things, especially, are real estate owners who own portfolios of buildings. And such an important aspect to us as well is having those good relationships as we look to scale up solar throughout their real estate portfolios as well.
well, amen for that. I want to make a couple of quick announcements. The Solar Podcast, these interviews that we do weekly, are available to you and everyone else at cesnrg.com/podcast. We are bringing on authors like Professor Greg Nemeth, who wrote a wonderful book on how solar got cheap. It is a sweeping history of the solar PV industry. Really a wonderful read. Anybody interested in solar, whether they're a veteran or a newcomer, would appreciate this book. Ryan Schaub with Architectural Solar at Lumos Solar, a native panel manufacturer in Colorado that does bar none the most beautiful architectural solar ground mount projects in the country. Thought leaders like Mark Pruitt, who was the first director of the Illinois Power Agency and now is an energy consultant, and then artists like Shala, who are creating art from solar PV in Chicago. So check us out. Please subscribe to the channel right there, that big red button. Give us a thumbs up. Please tell me what you want to hear about and give me ideas for other guests on the show. I'm always looking for guests, and they need to be thoughtful and appropriate, of course, but it's a big world, and I do the vast majority of my own curation of guests. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I am TG Montague at, just TG Montague on Twitter. With that, I want to thank you, Nick Blitterswyk, for coming on the show. What a wonderful asset you are to our industry. And I want to thank you for doing what you do day in and day out. Let's grow solar.